Welcome to The Next Interview, a podcast about careers, life, and achieving our greatest potential. And now, here's your host, Doland White.
So I want to welcome you to this episode of The Next Interview podcast. On today's podcast, I'm blessed. I have just a wonderful gentleman on the podcast with me, and Bryce Henson. Then Bryce is CEO of Fit Body Boot Camp. As you can see over the top of his right shoulder, there's a sign on the wall that says Fit Body Boot Camp. And welcome, Bryce. Thanks for taking time to come hang with me for a half hour or so and let the listeners meet from you and learn from you.
Dolan, my friend, very grateful and honored to be on your show. As we talked off Zoom, whatever you need, I'm all yours and excited to talk leadership, growth, mindset, all the things.
Cool. Well, there's a lot to it. So the podcast focuses on stuff that we learn becoming leaders, and it's been fun to watch and to continue to watch. I'm a huge fan of Fit Body. Youngest son number 5, Evan, lives in. Matter of fact, he got a shout out on the Fit Body app this week for being there every day. And I get a text daily on macros and what he's doing. Although I'm not sure what macros are, but I get texts on macros and stuff. So this will be great. So we've known each other for a while, but there are folks that'll watch this conversation that we're about to have who don't know you. And what I'd like to do is just take a couple of minutes at the beginning and talk about your journey into fitness and in your journey into Fit Body Boot Camp and in a bit into your journey into becoming the CEO, because there's multiple steps in this path that you've taken over the last few years. So I'm very, very interested kind of in that career growth. So I'll stop talking and kind of pass it back to you and say, go.
Love it. Well, similar kindred spirits, Dolan. We both spent the first, at least for me, decade in the Southeast. I spent the first 10 years of my life in rural Georgia. I was blessed to have a father who abandoned our household, who was a drug addict, addicted to alcohol and gambling. Because what that showed me is a blueprint for the man, the leader that I didn't want to become. And I say that a bit tongue in cheek, but my leadership and life philosophy is turning adversity into your advantage. So the first 10 years of my life, consequently, because of my father, was very volatile. It wasn't always bad, but when you have a father, a parent who's, addicted, it can create a lot of volatility. And thankfully, by the grace of God, my mother got us out of that situation when I was 10 with myself and 2 other siblings into quote unquote greener pastures. So I spent the next 14 years of my life living in the state of Michigan where she grew up. And it's interesting about leadership and transition, which I feel leadership is about navigating transition.
Yeah.
Many times, in transition, even when you're going to a good area or making a good move, you can have a rocky landing. And even though it was a really challenging situation for us to be in, we made the move to Michigan in a more stable environment. My grandma took us in because without her, we would have been living in a shelter, even worse. But because of that, it was a very good, stable environment. However, my mom had been out of the working world for 15 years, and she had no vision that she was going to be raising 3 kids on her own. So the first handful of years, probably better part of 10 years, was rocky. We used to run out of money before we used to run out of month. I could sense from a very young age that my mother was overwhelmed, and bless her heart, she was a courageous, very, very sweet lady. And she did everything that she could to put her kids in front. But I realized the value of work ethic. I realized the value of team, the family dynamic. And that really, created a lot of inspiration and visibility for me wanting to be the leader, the man that I didn't have growing up. So as much as it was a challenge, I took that adversity, if you will, and mentally reframed it, repositioned, retold the story, and turned it to an advantage. So that was my first, 20 years of life on the planet, high level. But growing up in Michigan, while it was a great place, amazing salt of the earth people, Doland.
Yeah.
One thing is for certain, similar to the Southeast, actually, for that matter, they're not the fitness capital of the world. So when I was 21 years young, I didn't develop fitness and mindset and good nutrition, habits. And when I moved to Southern California, after I graduated from university, I got an internship, which then turned into a full-time sales gig. I was excited to be in Los Angeles, the palm trees, the beaches, the blue skies, all that California and specifically LA has to offer. But Dolan, they don't tell you this when you're 21 years young, you're 3,000 miles from home, you
Yeah.
don't have a friend network, you don't have professional skills, and you don't have confidence because you don't have fitness, you don't have that foundation in your life. So the first couple of years of living in LA, which can be the plastic capital of the world, I had more dark days than good. And I
Yeah.
lived that way for the first couple of years. But a fortuitous situation happened. This is where the story of fitness comes in.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of my best friends from college, he was my first fitness mentor. His name was Adam. He had the six-pack abs, the glistening muscles. All the girls loved him. I certainly looked up to that. So after living with him for a few months, I finally mustered up enough courage to say, Adam, can you teach me a little bit about this fitness thing? And he turned to me and he said, Bryce, I thought you never asked, but if we're going to do this, I'm going to put you on the 12 program for 12 weeks. I'm going to introduce you to lifting weights, circuit training, clean nutrition, but most importantly, accountability. And after I get through the 12 weeks, you can make the decision for yourself if you want to stick with it. And I'm so glad he did, because I learned a really valuable lesson in coaching, but also leadership as well, as getting someone's commitment. And when you get someone's commitment on the front end, it increases the probability they'll be consistent with that commitment. And I followed
Right.
that program for 12 weeks. It turned out to be a 2-year journey. And I dropped 20 pounds of body fat. I put 20 pounds of lean muscle. But most importantly, it changed my life. My energy, my enthusiasm just went through the roof. In fact, I was in the sales career, as I just mentioned, and I went from the least performing sales rep in the company all the way to the highest performing sales rep in the company. And one thing had changed. It wasn't my follow-up script. It wasn't the sales protocol. It was
Yeah.
just the way I showed up, the energy, enthusiasm. And Dolan, to put a bow on this, that was my first foundation of leadership, of salesmanship, and fitness. It just rocked my world. And that really set the, I guess, trajectory for me wanting to become a fitness professional in the following years.
Yeah, that's exciting. It's interesting, when there's one thing that you touched on, Bryce, that I kind of want to go back to. Just and it was kind of at the very beginning of the story, and we've talked about this before, in our previous our off-camera calls when we chat about being blessed to be raised in a home of addiction or a home of abuse, and the things that come out of that, the lessons that we take away from that. But one thing that you touched on that I want to kind of call back as a hallmark statement, and that is just that you make a decision. It's up to us to make the decision not to be that. And we can decide. I see people in my life decide both ways. They decide they're going to follow that path that they've seen previously in their life and live that lifestyle. Or they make a decision to change that path. And when they change that path and become a leader, a self leader, not leader of other people, but a self leader, it's an amazing thing because it breaks that cycle forever. It's gone. And I want to give a tip of the hat to that one statement where you talk about I made the decision that I wasn't going to be doing that anymore, and this was how I was going to behave.
Well,
Um,
thank you. And I think for you and I, we have a very, similar story. There's some differences in intricacy for sure, but really
sure.
making that decision is impactful. And I heard an adage a while back, and the parable is, there's two twins, if you will, who had an alcoholic. One twin turned out to be a terrible drunk, chaos alcoholic. The
Mm,
other one turned out to be an incredible leader, never drank alcohol, lived a great life. And they asked the twins the question, why did you turn out this way? And they both responded. They said, well, looked and watched my father. And in that particular example, one of them followed the exact blueprint of their father. And then one of them, in our case, and specifically in this particular story for me, I saw that. I saw my father and made a decision elsewhere. So just to reinforce your point, Dylan, if you're listening to this right now, if you're watching to this, you're going through challenge, you're going through adversity, you're going through transition. That happens everything. Make adversity your advantage. And the only way you do that is you choose to decide the path forward.
yeah, that's a really great that's a strong point. So one of the things I think that comes out of that is, when we make a decision on looking at what blueprint we're going to follow, right? Because we learn our blueprint. We see what other individuals do, and we can decide to adopt some of the behavior, to enhance the behavior, to not do the behavior, all these things that can kind of go into that process. And with you coming into Fit Body, Fit Body Boot Camp was and I'll put some of this in the show notes so there's an explanation of what Fit Body Boot Camp is. We don't need to unpack that today. But Fit Body is, probably the largest fitness boot camp franchise there is, just period. So I'll put that plug in, that shameless plug in for Fit Body Bootcamp. And
Thank you.
it's a wonderful organization, just a wonderful, wonderful program. But so two things. There's Fit Body Bootcamp, which is the regime of what happens inside of the boot camp. But then there's also this guy named Bedros who hatched Fit Body and had ups and downs in that hatching through his story with how Fit Body went. So how did you connect in with Fit Body? And then how did you connect in with Bedros? This is leading into the next question, just to plant it in your brain of, Bedros is the founder, father of Fit Body Bootcamp. You are now the CEO, chief executive of the company, so you're running it. So there's a transition that goes from the individual that built it to the individual that's going to build it better and bigger. And you're that other guy.
Mhm.
So what's the attraction to Fit Body with Bedros, and then kind of that transition with moving over being the guy that's building it, bigger and better?
Yeah, incredible question. We'll unpack that. So I just laid down the foundation, how I found fitness and really made that change. The
Yeah.
second transition, which interesting in leadership, a lot of the transition has to do with the actual transition. The other aspect has to do with the identity shift that you need to, become when you're going through that transition to be that other person.
Right.
And how I found Fit Body Bootcamp before I transitioned to CEO is I found as a franchise partner. After that experience I just went through, I was leading a healthy and fit lifestyle. I never thought in a million years I would actually go into coaching and fitness. My life was firing all cylinders. My sales career was cranking.
Mm-hmm.
2 years later, Dolan, someone walked up to me at the gym, on a big box gym on a weekend. I'll never forget, started, asking me questions about how I trained, how I, what my nutritional protocol was. And for the first time I stopped and I was like, wait, me? Wait, me? Because at that point, I lived the lifestyle, but I didn't have an identity shift that I could actually be a coach or a mentor to someone else. So throughout that experience, that's when the first aha of me getting into the fitness industry, what if I could be a coach? So after that experience, I had no vision of going into a full time and running gyms and being a fitness, franchise leader as I am today. I thought I could train some clients in the nights and weekends. So I did the most logical thing I could do. I enrolled myself in National Academy of Sports Medicine. I became a certified personal trainer. I started training clients in the nights and weekends. And then speaking of Mr. Bedros Keuilian, our dear friend, my business partner, and I started receiving ads from this gentleman named Bedros Keuilian, who was talking about how to launch a fitness business, how to grow a fitness business, how to get clients better results. And I was very interested in that. So I latched onto his emails, and I went through a life, I guess, a transition myself. I decided to move to South America for 2 years with a newfound rejuvenation of fitness, of confidence. I always wanted to test myself and learn another language. So I did that from the years of 2010 to 2012. And when I knew I was coming back to Southern California, I started paying attention a little bit closely to the emails that Bedros was putting out about Fit Body Bootcamp. And in 2012 was transitioning from a licensee program all the way to a proper brick and mortar franchise. So I put an expressive interest. I learned more about the organization at the time. I mean, now we have hundreds of locations throughout North America. At the time, I think we had 10. So I did my diligence. And then in the summer of 2012, after I did all the diligence, I ended up scheduling a meeting with Bedros, and I did the most exciting, but also the most terrifying decision of my life. And I invested my life savings in this little dream of business ownership called Fit Body Bootcamp. And I launched in Orange County, California. And that was 2012. And Dolan, I'm going to give you all the highlights, but there was a lot of lowlights and learning lessons along the way. I
Sure.
ended up scaling to 5 locations. I brought my wife on board, my mom on board, my sister, my brother on board. I made it a whole family thing. This is why family, teamwork, leadership is so powerful to me, and became one of the most successful franchise partners and gym owners in our Fit Body Bootcamp brand. And that led us to about 2018. And at that point, shortly after we met, but right before that, Bedros is a very strong visionary, very strong entrepreneur. He'll be the first one to tell you he's not an operations guy. So in his vision, he knew the program was growing, the franchise was growing, and he wanted more institutional knowledge, more boots on the ground, influence that could come support HQ to be able to provide more support for our brand. So he reached out to me initially with the vice president role, which eventually led to the CEO role. But interestingly enough, if you can believe, same reaction as when I went, became fit, and then someone walked up to me and asked me for guidance and mentorship and fitness. When Bedros reached out to be his vice president, my first response was, wait, me? Wait, me? what do you see in me, B? And granted, I'm
Right,
being
Bryce?
a little facetious here, but tongue in cheek. But that just
Yeah.
goes to show if you have a strong plan, if you execute that plan, you build relationships and take coaching, people are watching. Good things will happen. So I guess the point of me telling you this, and we can, drill into the first story. People always ask me, Bryce, like, how do you find opportunities? How do you always look around corners? And truth be told, a lot of times I have a vision, I have a plan, and I just execute that plan and I try to be good to people. I try to lead people, and I really believe in building relationships. And there's a common pattern in my life. When I do that, then opportunity attracts to me. It's that law of attraction, if you will. So that second point that I want to, share to your audience is you might not have the roadmap, the exact plan, but when you focus on leading yourself, when you clean up your health, clean up your nutrition, become a better person, start building skill sets, people are watching and good things will be attracted to you. And that's really how I got the opportunity to join Foisters with Bedros, and then eventually meeting you about a year into that journey, which has been a whirlwind. I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah, yeah, and likewise grateful that too. It's funny you mentioned that because I think, there's a couple things in there. Where I was speaking with a client this past week and was reminding them that when we build all these detailed plans and we know where we're going to be every minute and every day and all of the things that we're going to do, God laughs at us.
Amen. Doesn't he, right?
God just does. It's like his way of just saying, "Nice try. Let me test your resiliency. Let me see if you'll stand up again. Let me see if you're really committed to this idea." Um, and so it's great to hear, Bryce, too, because I think one of the important things that we tend to forget as leaders, and I'll be posting a video later this week about this, but specifically in the topic of relationships, because it is the relationships. That's the content of our life is the relationships that we build.
Oh, I completely buy into that, my friend. I mean, the quality of your life, the impact you'll have, the fulfillment that you'll achieve, you can't take it with you, my friends. When you're looking at this, all the achievement, all the glory, it comes down to the people that you can share, the people that you connect with, the people that you can influence.
Yeah.
That's your biggest source of fulfillment. And it really comes down to relationship capital. So I completely buy into that. And that's been a huge part of my success. It's also been a huge part of my fulfillment.
Yeah, I agree, Bryce. I think it's one of the reasons it's anyway, it's a great topic, I think, from a relationship perspective. But as you coming in, and with Bedros reaching out to you and saying, and I completely get why Bedros reached out to you. Bedros reached out and said, "Hey, would you consider this?" And with the shift then with you then transitioning into CEO, and Bedros, obviously, some of his role has to shift. So how has the and I look at those kinds of moments as an opportunity for collaboration. Sometimes there's a lot of stress in those moments where that founder is shifting into a different role and they're going to go have to they got to go find their way. It's a different day. And the CEO is coming in and you're coming in, from the original point, Bryce, of coming in from a very trusted position, a franchise owner, multiple franchise owner, very successful in what you did. So you knew the business and understood it at that level. Running a franchise is different. Running a franchisee or franchisor is different.
Oh,
So
yeah.
what was the shift like for you coming into that role, kind of the mindset shift for you, stepping into what I'll call a larger position, Bryce? And for Bedros, how did that transition go?
Yeah, spot on. And it's interesting. It's within the Fit Body Bootcamp brand, but one of the things you talked about, I actually, as a franchise partner, I was in the fitness industry serving fitness clients. And when I
Hmm.
ascended to our franchise system, our headquarters, I shifted away from the fitness industry directly and transitioned to the franchising industry. Now I'm having to work with attorneys and audits and the Federal Trade Commission, even though it's in the same branding. We're talking about two completely different industries. In fact,
Yeah.
my franchise partners and my clients, if you will, went away from being fitness clients to now business owners. So a completely different shift there. So that was a
Hmm.
huge transition first and foremost. I think when I look back and I joined headquarters in June of 2018. I would say I'm so grateful. I have this mindset. It's interesting. I'm a leadership expert, but I'm also a leadership white belt. And I think that's a really good mindset to have because in
Yeah.
leadership and life, you can always learn another skill to get better. In leadership, I mean, it's so powerful, it's so fulfilling, it's so humbling as well. So it took me about 6 months of just taking a step back, studying, having that white male mentality, figuring out all the intricacies. And I'm really glad I took that approach and I understand where we were strong. I understand where we had weaknesses, et cetera. And that gave me about a 6 month trajectory of having a better understanding of where we were, which then in 2019 led me to make an observation, which is probably one of the best observations we've made as a company. I thought to myself, who better to coach our franchise partners to success than the most successful franchise partners? Because we had an operations team and business coaches, but what I noticed is they were good people and they had some, coaching background, but no one had not only fitness experience, but specifically fit body experience from an owner level. So
Interesting.
that was really the birth of the coaching and profitability department, where we ended up recruiting, and I personally recruited 6 of our most successful franchise business partners to now help coach and support our franchise partners, which has just been foundationally so valuable. In fact, my brother Barrett, who is one of the most successful franchise partners in our brand, he has a 7-figure gym in the state of Michigan. He was my first or my second franchise business coach, and he's actually ascended into my executive director of coaching and in education. So that also goes to show is if you take a step back in any transition and just try to get a better understanding of, okay, where are you strong? Where are you weak? Come with an observation and, that mindset. And that really, really helped me with that transition. The second part that I want to allude to, and you talked about, sometimes there's friction points, et cetera. As we were, tailing into 2000, end of 2019 and 2020, of course, the COVID pandemic was upon us. We had no idea at that point. But even at that point, there was some friction in terms of Bedros's interest because he was very clear. I mean, he was so grateful for the lay of the foundation, but he wanted to set his sights on other programs to serve men and boys in different capacities. He ended up spinning up, the Squire program, which is a program for young boys, then the project, to help, men. So that was where his interest was lying, but he still had the CEO role. So there was a lot of franchise partners looking for him for the ultimate guidance, but he was kind of in that transition process. It got to the point, I want to say end of 2020, and Bedros tells the story all the time, but in dramatic fashion, after a series of conflict and situations, of course, the stress and the chaos of COVID and the world changing,
Right.
but he turned to me and he said, Bryce, I need help. Within 12 months, I'm going to put in my quote unquote proverbial resignation for the CEO of Fit Body Boot Camp. And my vision is to ascend you into this particular role. Now, in fairness, the last question that I asked him on the quote unquote interview conversation to become his VP, which it wasn't really an interview. He hand selected to recruit me, but we, sat through a series of, 3 months to really pressure test to make sure the situation I was going to walk into was going to be a win-win. The
Right.
last question I asked him was, hey, Bedros, is there any other questions that I should be asking, but I haven't? And he turned, he said,
Great.
Bryce, the question you should ask is, when will be the point, assuming that you execute and you prove your value at HQ, that you can assume the ranks of the CEO position. So when he quote unquote made that proverbial resignation in a meeting, in a leadership meeting, it wasn't a surprise to me, the overall vision. It was a surprise to me in that particular moment. But what I sensed in that period of time is that his skill set, his vision, it was changing, or his skill set was always the same. Great visionary, leader, marketer, et cetera. But his vision in terms of his
Right.
role was changing, and he needed and wanted, help to pass the baton to, the new leader, which would be me. So at that moment in time, while there was friction leading up to that, it actually was a breakthrough. It created clarity, and that moment in time, we created a 12-month transition plan where eventually it actually took less than that. It was about 3 quarters after that was that I fully transitioned the CEO role. So that period of friction actually created clarity and it laid down the foundation for the vision of what would be to come. So there is value, I guess, to put a bow on that. There's value in friction in transition as long as you clearly communicate, and which is exactly how things happen and materialized.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Is one of the I think that topics that leaders forget about because they try that there's friction avoidance. They try not to have what can I do not to have friction in my team, and how can I want everything to be nice, and I want everybody to get along, and we're going to have this world. And there is this point where you build, and we'll talk for just a couple of minutes in the few minutes that we have left, just a difference about skills and desire. But two very important things. But all organizations require friction. Nothing moves without friction. Nothing. How you plan for it, how you build around it, what you do to execute with friction changes it. Friction creates velocity. Velocity creates growth. Growth creates opportunity, and opportunity creates taking care of the people you know and love the most. And it just is that path. So I love that story about having Bedros with friction and the things that he wanted to go do and realizing. And I also think it's important as a leader. It's kind of a Clint Eastwood moment where Clint Eastwood says in one of his movies, it says, "A man's got to know his limitations." It's a very bad Clint Eastwood imitation, but you got to know what your limitations are, and limitations aren't necessarily skill caps. Limitations are desire, focus, where I really want to go, what I want to do, and then how do I fulfill that spot where I was, so we don't lose that, we grow it to the next level. So it's an interesting thing, and that's friction in and unto itself. When you're a founder and you're going through that emotional shift of what's the right thing for this thing that I created, and what's the right thing for the people, and what's the right thing for Bryce? Is this the right thing for him? So
Yeah. Amen. And to your point about friction, I mean, growth, you said the word growth, that happens on the other side of friction. Just think about anything successful you've ever
yeah,
achieved, whether it's be getting in shape. It's friction to get up early, to not hit the snooze, to eat well, to train. But once you get on the other side of the friction, you feel incredible. There's friction when you and your spouse, have a big topic that you need to get through, and it's not fun, it's not uncomfortable. But when you get through it and you provide clarity, there's growth on the other side. So,
yeah.
from a leadership lens, whether you're leading a company, leading a massive organization, or leading yourself or leading your family, there's value as long as you handle it, and come with a growth mindset and from a positivity mindset. There is so much value, growth, and success on the other side of friction, which is an incredible leadership lesson.
Yeah, that's so important. That's just so important. Just don't avoid friction. There's this old thing about God put the greatest things on the other side of fear and friction. So it's all there. It's on the other side of it. Just go do it. So it's interesting, Bryce, talking about, and we could go for a long time. Well, we may have to come back and do another episode on some of this stuff.
I would love to.
But when you're talking about, as you kind of stepped into the role and ascended from you stepped into the role of vice president, and then ascended into the role of CEO. And one of the things that goes into that is making it your own. I mean, it's Fit Body Boot Camp. It has a circle and a wrapper around it and some things, but there's things that are Bryce that are not Bedros. And the biggest part of that, and you've kind of talked a little bit about this earlier, and I love the fact that your brother is part of your organization. I just think that's just so cool, Bryce. But it is people and putting the right, there's the proverbial saying about putting the right people on the bus in the right seat.
So true.
And in putting people in their skills and desire. So in short, as you are building your organization to kind of make this your team, and I know that there's a fundamental operational framework that you've put in place. There's different things that are done, but at the end of the day, frameworks are worthless without the right people. So how did you view putting the right people into the roles? How did you view what was your thinking in that process? And I know it's an evolution, but how was that for you to make it Bryce's Fit Body Boot Camp, not Bedros's Fit Body Boot Camp?
Yeah. Well, I think first and foremost, change and transition, it takes time as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's also, important to understand from a leadership framework, just because the transition happened, on July 1st of 2021, which was actually about 3/4, about 9 months after, that meeting, that friction-based meeting with the hypothetical internal resignation that I was handed as CEO. it wasn't June 1st, 2021, when all of a sudden it was Bryce's ship and then completely Bedros's, thrown to the wind. There
Right.
was even a transition at that. So I think it's really important, when you're looking at this and you're, exploring whatever the next path is from a leadership lens, know that there's time in transition to make sure that things go smooth. And even now, 3 years removed, I would say now the vast majority of the brand has fully accepted the vision of, my vision from a leadership lens. But there's still some franchise partners who joined the brand in 2016 and 17 and 18 who know Bedros and still have a connection there, and that's okay. But so I think
Sure.
that's, it's important to start, from a transitional perspective. The second thing we talk about in terms of recruiting people, and at the end of the day, the leader's job is to be able to recruit people, bring life, breathe life, assemble a team of really strong people that can collaborate together and really cast a vision so the team can move together. So that's really foundational to the success of any leader. So you have to be a very people focused person in a leadership role. But
Mhm.
skill and desire are two things that you pointed out, which are extremely important. And why leadership is so productive, it's so valuable, but it's also really challenging as well. There's no one size fits all for leadership because it's dynamic. People are dynamic. So when I look at my leadership lens, okay, when I was looking to build my leadership team, thankfully I had two rock stars already on my leadership team. Brittany Carter, who oversaw my operation team, and then Jessica, who oversaw my finance and HR, which still does to this day. I've ended up recruiting now 4 other leadership, my director of sales, my director of coaching, my director of acquisition, and now my director of operations, since I extended Brittany into a different role within the leadership team. But those were 4 different roles that I needed to bring in people to support my leadership. And at that leadership level, we're a multiple 8-figure organization. It's a big
Mhm.
organization. It's a very complex organization. I need both skill and desire. The desire has to be there. The things I look for, Dolan, and the qualities and characteristics are my candidates and my people. Are they hungry? Are they humble? Are they smart? I mean, these are, characteristics and filters that we need to look through from the skill set perspective. Okay. From a desire perspective as well. Like, do they
Mhm.
have the hunger for it? And do they have the qualifications? So the hunger comes from the desire, and the skill set. Do they have actually the skill set, for the particular role? So when I'm building a leadership team at the highest of levels, that's what I need to look for. Now, on the flip side, our organization, even though I've transitioned into the franchising industry, as we talked about, Fit Body
Yeah.
Bootcamp is a global powerhouse in the fitness industry. We get our clients at our locations, our Fit Body locations, amazing fitness and fat loss results. We do that through bringing coaches on board. Our coaches are the lifeblood of all our organizations. They're the ones running the training sessions, building, strong rapport and relationship with our clients, providing coaching, both mindset coaching, fitness coaching, nutrition coaching. So the
Right.
vast majority of our hires organization wide are actually at the lower level. And I shouldn't say lower level in a bad way, but just the foundational level of fitness
Sure.
coaches. Now, what I look for in that particular recruit, the framework that we've created, they don't have to be overly skilled. It's actually the desire is way more important, because I would rather take someone who's humble, hungry, smart, who has the desire, to connect with people, to be a strong fitness mindset or nutrition coach, and then be able to form and mold them, okay, into that particular role. I would much rather have that at that particular position than someone who walks in with all the skill set, maybe all the letters behind their name, they're the most accredited trainer. However, they have a hard time being molded into our organization. So in that particular, hiring process, I look for something very, very different. I look at the desire first and foremost, way more than the skill set. So as a leader, this is why it's challenging, it's dynamic, but it's also fulfilling. Depending on who you're hiring for and what level of the organization will depend on what value you put on the skill or desire, or both. So hopefully that provides a little bit light into the framework that I've, learned and grown. And to your point, it's an evolution as well, but I've been able to find a lot of success in this particular transition of overtaking the role of CEO.
Yeah. No, that helps. I think that's a great explanation, Bryce, because there are times where you're weighing skills and desires. And I love your hungry,
Humble, hungry, and smart.
humble, hungry, and smart. Okay. So just I'll state it, even though we're recording this, I'm going to borrow that. So
Please do.
just don't want to borrow that. But no, but I do believe it is those kinds of individuals, because it is the dynamic of building that team, that empowered team, an autonomous team that like, and trust, and you have to trust that you're willing to let to let those tasks go, those projects go, and that they're going to bring them home.
They're going to execute. Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to go do it. And they have to be hungry to go do that. And they have to have a strong desire to succeed. I think those are critical things. So look, we're coming within seconds of our promised deadline for this call today. But I did want to do one thing. The very first thing is I want to extend a set of high regards for a podcast that you happen to host. And I want to give just an opportunity for a 10 or 15 second shameless plug. We'll go back to do another shameless plug for your podcast, the CEO Show. So your CEO Show focuses on three things.
Thank you so much for that opportunity. I teach leadership, I promote capitalism, and I defend free speech because for me, I'm a humanitarian first and foremost. My core value is freedom. And what I learned and why I teach leadership is because leadership is always the problem and always the solution. From economics perspective, capitalism is the economic system that has created the biggest superpower in the world, known as the United States of America, and freedom of thought and expression is extremely important for human prosperity, but also from a leadership lens. And I'll share this why. Why is because what I've learned at leadership, you have to have a strong feedback culture. When you have a strong feedback culture and you empower your teammates to share good ideas, to share bad ideas, I believe in human nature. I've seen this over and over again. When you empower your teammates to have that open, honest conversation, then eventually when good ideas meet at bad ideas, good ideas rise and bad ideas go down. The opposite is true. We've all had that leader where you walk in on eggshells and you're afraid to say anything, otherwise it's going to be snap. What happens there is eventually good ideas rise to the bottom, bad ideas go to the top. So for me, this is why that framework on the CEO Show of teaching leadership, promoting capitalism, defending free speech is paramount to human prosperity, and would highly encourage any of your listeners, if you get value, please continue on. You can find the show on YouTube or by following me at Real Bryce Henson.
That's very cool. And thank you for that. And if for those of you who may be picking up this episode of the next interview on YouTube today, if you look in the left column of YouTube, you'll find his show linked into my show. So go listen. I would highly recommend it. Also, if you get a moment, go take Bryce's leadership course. It's free. Just go do it. Go learn as much as you can about leadership. If you liked this podcast today, give it a no, like, or follow. Please do. But the most important thing is not a no, like, or follow or subscribe. This is not about building audiences. This podcast is dedicated to one thing and one thing only. If you know two people who learned something from the conversation that Bryce and I had today about leadership, about caring for your people, about friction, share this podcast with them, about living a better life, and you can make a decision to go do that. Share this podcast with them. Help them be better people. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Bryce.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate you, my friend.
All right. Thanks. Peace out.
You've been listening to The Next Interview. For more information about today's guest, be sure to visit the show notes. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow and be sure to join us here on The Next Interview.